Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Christopher Paolini, and today I'm talking with Stefan Bachmann, who is the author of The Peculiar and The Whatnot, and has more books coming out shortly, which we'll talk about. And full disclosure here, I have actually blurbed The Peculiar and The Whatnot, since I enjoyed them so much. So I'm not a disinterested person here. That you started writing very young yourself, and The Peculiar was published when you were how old?
19.
So what got you into writing at such a young age in the first place? I mean, lots of people write when they're in their teens. Very few of them go on to get published at such a young age. So in your case, what was your journey with that?
I think it was just the fact that I read a lot as a kid and was read to by my parents. And I think if you get a lot of kind of those impulses and ideas growing up, at some point your brain is just going to be so full of things, you're going to want to do something with them. And and that's what happened. My parents read me, or my mom read me Lord of the Rings when I was really, really young. And I was so obsessed with it. And I was like 6 years old, so I don't think I understood exactly what was happening. But I don't think you need to with certain books. Like the language and the way he builds the world, you don't even have to necessarily understand it to get an impression and be really fascinated by the way a book can give you a feeling, I guess. And so I that really interested me as a kid. And I wanted to figure out how authors did this like magical thing of putting down bits of ink and somehow making people feel things. Um, and at some point I tried to do it and I was like, whoa, this is really hard. I'm not actually good at this. And I wrote maybe 4 or 5 books and they got like progressively less awful. The first ones were really, really terrible. Um, and then eventually The Peculiar came along and I was like, I like this. Maybe I should send it out. And I did. And then that got published.
And how did you figure out where to send it or who to send it to?
I did a lot of Googling. I looked up agents and I looked up editors, and I figured out fairly quickly that editors don't like being sent manuscripts. Or actually, I don't even think they get sent manuscripts. There's like a slush pile, and people may or may not read them if you send it directly to the publisher. So I sent to agents. I sent about yeah, I think I sent like one query at a time, which is really stupid, kind of. And I had no clue what I was doing. And my first query was really terrible. And I sent it out and I got a rejection. Um, and it kind of was a good thing that I got a rejection. I'm really happy I did because it made me like really want to get an agent. Like they said, oh, we don't like it. And I was like, okay, then I'm going to make you like it. And so I went back to the book and rewrote a whole bunch of it. And I think it wouldn't have been good if I had gotten an agent on first try or on second try, even because each time I got a rejection, I would go back to the book and rewrite stuff and try to polish it up. And it definitely made me like ambitious.
And how long was that whole process?
It was about a year, I think, from finishing the book to selling the book. I think it's about a year. And I sent it to about 8 agents, which is not a lot, but it felt like a lot because I sent each letter one at a time. So it felt like ages. And at the end, I had 2 agents who were interested, and one of the agents asked me to call her, which was the most terrifying thing. I was so nervous. And I did. And she had some suggestions, and then she offered representation if I would do those suggestions. And then the other agent just liked the book the way it was. And so obviously I went with the one who liked the book the way it was. Yeah, and then she sold it fairly quickly to Virginia Duncan at HarperCollins. And that was a surprise and a nice one.
Given your experience as a younger writer yourself, is there any advice you would give to anyone who's up and coming, just starting out and looking for some pointers?
I would just say, like, don't stress out about trying to get published really young, because honestly, like, it's parts of it are fun, and obviously you're not going to listen to any advice anyone gives you anyway, and I wouldn't have either. Like, I think it's cool to go for it if you want it, but I feel like also at the same time, it's not it's not like a race to write a book really young. You can just also live and life and figure things out. And, you know, there are good things and bad things about being a young writer. And if I could talk to myself like 5 years ago, I just would have been like, just chill a little bit. Do not freak out about this. Just relax about everything. That's pretty much the key to success, I think.
That's funny. That's actually the one thing I would tell myself is don't stress so much.
Really, yeah. But again, if you're a teenager, it's like all you do. You're just intense about everything. So it would be ignored, but whatever.
Let's talk about the new book. You said it's coming out in March of 2016. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it's called A Drop of Night.
Ooh, good title.
Thank you. I'm kind of nervous about it because it wasn't called that originally. It was called Dead Man's Palace.
Both good titles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was my editor's reaction too. She was like, oh, I don't even know what she thought, but everyone thought it was about pirates because it Dead Man's Chest.
That sounds almost like something like one of the old Conan the Barbarian stories, sort of.
Oh, maybe that was the problem. Yeah, I actually still like the title, but yeah, everyone was like, no, you have to change it. So it's about an underground palace in Paris that's been unearthed, and it switches back and forth between the modern day team that's going in to like excavate the palace and the people who fled there during the French Revolution to like live in luxury while people were getting their heads chopped off on the surface. And so the aristocrats fled there and locked themselves in, and then 200 years later, it's been found, and it's kind of like a horror thriller type thing. Like, I hope it's thrilling. I don't know, but yeah, it's definitely different from the other books because I also like the modern voice was really different for me to do because the Peculiar and the Whatnot are kind of old fashioned, I think, the writing style. And this one is like I had to figure out how to write like modern day people, which was weird. So yeah, it is. And it's a way book, a young adult book, as opposed to the other books were middle grade. So it's kind of really different for me, and I'm super freaked out about what people think of it. And like, it's kind of scary because I feel like writing a sequel, at least you know it's like a continuation of plot and character in a way, and you kind of know what you're doing to an extent. But if you do like a completely different genre, it's just scary, and I literally have no clue what people think of it. So I don't know.
Tell me about it. I'm in the same boat at the moment. So, well, I have to. I'm kind of curious how people will react to the next book. And that's going to be the sort of the telling thing for me is, can I write a book outside the Inheritance Cycle series? Will people like it? And how will that change the fan? I mean, the fan community will still be bigger for Aragon and the Inheritance Cycle just because it's been around longer. And honestly, the new book is not. It doesn't have the same appeal because it's not the same sort of coming of age story like Harry Potter or that Hunger Games even that really appeals to that sort of broad audience. So I don't know what kind of a reaction this new book's going to get. I think it's very good, but I don't know what reaction it's going to get.
Yeah.
So when everything's going well, how much do you tend to write in a day?
I don't know actually. I usually write my books chapter by chapter and then give them to either my sister or a friend to read. And so I don't really look at the word count so much as finishing the chapter and then polishing it up. And I try to polish it up within a week.
So you're editing as you're writing then?
Yeah. With my latest book, I didn't do that. I wrote it beginning to end, and that was not such a good thing. So the book I'm writing right now, which is another middle grade book, that's chapter by chapter, and I feel like that's better for me because I kind of develop the story and get more details in while I'm writing, and so I don't have to do as much afterwards. And I feel like that's more organic then because adding things in later for me it doesn't usually work out as well as when I'm like adding them right when I'm in the writing of the chapter.
Yeah, adding stuff after the fact is always harder for me, at least.
Yeah, it's a lot harder for me, and I had to do a lot of that with A Drop of Night. And I think it was because I didn't do it chapter by chapter, and I did it in one fell swoop, and I felt that would be better because I feel like a lot of writing is about like getting into the flow of it. and I felt like I had the flow. But then when I reread it, I was like, no, this doesn't work at all. I think it's kind of a balance between like the technicality of it and like what you feel. And if it's just all feeling, it doesn't work either. If you're just like splatting everything onto the screen and not really thinking about it.
So, do you feel like that's happening because you're, um, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, as you're writing along, when you're in the flow of emotion, are you running into problems because you haven't thought out the characters or the events that are happening, or is it something that is, you have the story, you have the events, you have the characters, and just you're writing it so fast that maybe you're not delving into them as deeply as you want to, or the language isn't as beautiful as you'd like, or I'm kind of curious where the problems are arising.
Uh-huh. I think it is that you don't think about every aspect that you should be thinking about, because there are a lot of different things you should be thinking about when you're writing a scene, whether it's the atmosphere you're trying to convey or the feeling maybe will be there, but sometimes what you feel though isn't what's coming across to the reader, and you also have to like figure out how to write it properly, and I feel like that isn't done as much. You're not thinking about how you're conveying it. You're just like putting it down, I guess. And for me it was a combination of not knowing who the characters were exactly and not putting enough detail into kind of the physicality of what they're doing and where they are. So it was a bunch of people running around, and I knew what they were thinking and I knew how everything looked, but whether the reader did was a totally different subject. And so I had to kind of go back and do that. And I don't think that's a great way to write a book. I think it's important to kind of know beforehand at least what you want to say in a scene. I think for me it's a lot about like anticipating almost like a second before you write the word or the sentence exactly what you're trying to say. And if you don't have that, then nothing really happens and it's just all choppy. And the weird thing is like it's the same for a lot of things. It's the same for music too, like anticipating what you're going to play before you play it, or like playing tennis, like anticipating the hit. And I don't know what that is exactly, like why that is, but I think you do kind of have to know what you're doing before you do it, and then everything will work out. And if you're just like doing it without thinking, it doesn't really work. I don't know.
I think it's the combination of considered, learned skill combined with instinct. And if you don't,
Yeah,
so if you don't take that moment, before springing into action to consider what the action is going to be, then your instincts may do whatever they're going to do, but your instincts need to be guided by your experience and skill.
exactly.
Well, and there's always that balance between, do you want the most ravishing prose in the world, or are you more interested in just, the story itself? I mean, you hope to have both things equally good, but sometimes you have to choose.
It's kind of hard though, because sometimes you just want to describe everything like for 10 paragraphs because it's like so pretty in your mind. But then you're like, okay, this is really slowing down the story. That's one of the hardest things for me, is to find a balance between description and action, and to make sure there's just enough description to make kind of a dense atmosphere, but not to slow down the story. Like the description always has to be interesting enough that it feels like it's moving the story along. And for me, that's super hard because usually I'll just be like blah blah, just describing things, and then I have to cut like 5 paragraphs later. But
Honestly, I've actually um, been moving away from using as much description as I did early on. It partly because it's like I've described so many things so many times in such great detail that if I'm coming to another interesting room, or even some fantastical scene, it's kind of like, well, I've described this a lot of times. I know my readers have probably seen this stuff before, so either I just try to find some nice, interesting, succinct way of summing it up, or if there is going to be a long description, it better be a darn interesting one, or there's no point to it.
yeah, and the cool thing is sometimes the best descriptions are the ones that are just really short, but they like do everything they need to do for the reader to fill in the blanks. So when you get like, that would be like my ideal, like what I would strive to do, because I tried to, in this newest book, tried to write in a really modern kind of spare style, which I had never tried before. And so I was trying to like describe everything in like one sentence. um And yeah, just trying to find like the exact right word and then nothing else and hope that that's enough.
But you're pleased with the final result.
Now I am. I am, and it feels like a really like I learned a lot. But again, like it doesn't even matter what you yourself think because you're usually like not the best judge, or I'm at least not the best judge of what I write. So I'm still kind of like, even if I thought it was the best book ever, I'd still be terrified because like, you know.
Yeah, I just had to read a earlier chapter in my new manuscript, and I had one of those moments where I said, "Oh, this is horrible. No one's ever going to want to read it. It's horrible. It's horrible." And then I calmed down a little and said, "You know what? Okay, I'm overstating things. It's not horrible. I really just need to smooth a line here, smooth a line there, and then it'll be okay."
And that's usually what it is. Like, usually, I think you have to have a healthy balance between thinking you're really brilliant and thinking you're like have a lot to learn. And for me, I'm usually like, oh, this is terrible and everything I write is junk. But at some point, you have to kind of get in the middle of thinking what you do is actually good and like, being okay with it. But yeah, usually I'm just like, no, I don't even know why I wrote a book. This is bad.
You've already written some awesome books, I think, and personally, I'm looking forward to seeing what you keep writing in the future. Well, this has been a real pleasure talking with you today. Thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to this.
Thank you.
I hope people enjoyed watching us, and we'll talk again sometime soon.